Hello and welcome back to the It Depends podcast. I, as always, am your host. My name is Kevin Goldsmith. I have been a Chief Technology Officer for a number of years. I've also been a VP of Engineering, a Director of Engineering, an Engineering Manager, an Engineering Lead, and of course, a developer for many years. And I wrote a book. The book is called It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022. It was published in March of this year, 2024. By Unit Circle Press. And in this podcast, we serialize the audiobook, a new chapter every episode. The episodes come out every 2 weeks. On the weeks that there isn't an episode, there's a newsletter. The newsletter comes out on those weeks, and it also is serializing the text of the book. The newsletter serializes the book out of order because the book is a collection of separate articles, so they don't necessarily need to be in order. But the podcast serializes them in order. So if you subscribe to both, you get different content each week. If you're interested in the book, it makes a great Christmas gift for the engineering leader or future engineering leader in your life. Or if you're a director or VP or CTO and you have managers reporting to you, it's a great gift for them. I've given books to the managers that report to me in the past. Obviously not my book. That's a little weird. As holiday gifts, books I liked or books I thought would be valuable for them to read. And I know that was appreciated. So if you're looking for something to give your direct reports this holiday season, feel free to give them copies of this book. I would appreciate that very much. There's no advertising on this podcast. What I would appreciate, if you haven't already bought the book, feel free to buy the book. But also there's a survey. We're on chapter 26 this episode of 36. And so I'm trying to figure out what to do when we're done. Do we say, okay, that was great, thank you, and I shut this down, or do I keep it going? And if I did, what would I cover? What would you want to hear about? So please fill out the survey. It's linked in the show notes. It's also linked from itdependsbook.net, which is where you can find links to the podcast, links to the newsletter, information about the book, links to the stores the book's available from. It's all there. So please check that out. You can also reach out to me directly, contact@itdependsbook.net. It Depends Book, one word, nothing between the words there. We are now in the last section of the book. We just finished the Agile section. We are now into the leading organization section. So I tried to collect the chapters into sections that sort of thematically made sense. This last section is really about leading organizations, meaning multiple teams. It's still, I think, very applicable to an engineering manager, somebody leading a single team, but a lot of it is honestly oriented towards more senior leaders. And it's partially because a lot of this is covering the time where I was now a director, moving into VP and then CTO. And this week's chapter is the Spotify model, how to create, dissolve, and remix teams to be more dynamic and more innovative. This is an article I wrote while I was still working at Spotify. So you hear me talking about Spotify in the present tense and things we do, even though now it's a long time ago. This covers the Spotify model. When I joined Spotify, that model was in place. It was still new. Nobody knew about it when I joined the company. I'd never heard of it before I joined the company, but I joined and it was already there. As I was there, it became very well known. And a lot of people were really interested in it. And Spotify had never really given that much information about it, especially, 2013, 2014. There was the original white paper by Anders Iversen and Henrik Nyberg that was available and people were using it as a reference. A couple of years later, Henrik published the videos that a lot of people know. But in between there really just wasn't. There was just the white paper. And a lot of people, a lot of companies were trying to adopt the Spotify model and didn't have enough information to do it well. And so they were doing it poorly or just doing it the best they could, but they just didn't understand it. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Honeypot people asked me to write this article. And so I tried to take the original white paper and give a little bit more context specifically around this idea of remixing teams, which we did quite a lot of. My tribe was the music player tribe. When I talk in this chapter about long-lived teams as opposed to teams that were creating and dissolving, I didn't have a lot of that because my teams were responsible for things like search, things like the artist pages and the album pages. Those things obviously don't go away. They're still all there on Spotify. And actually, when I wrote this article, we had just done one of these kind of short-lived teams to achieve a very specific agreement we had with another company and get that done. And so I had that experience fresh in my mind when I wrote this article. But that was, other tribes did that a lot more than my tribe did. But I did see the value of it, especially coming from Adobe and Microsoft, where I'd been for combined 17 years prior to going to Spotify. I will also say at this point, we were already starting to see some of the Spotify backlash, the Spotify model backlash. And this next chapter, the chapter you'll hear in the next episode, was also a direct response to me seeing companies trying to implement the Spotify model with poor or incomplete information, not understanding how tied it was to the company culture, implementing it poorly. I was starting to hear companies say, oh no, it doesn't work, or Spotify doesn't really do that because we tried it and it didn't work, which is nonsense. We absolutely did it. It worked great. It worked exceptionally well. Does Spotify still do it? No, they don't. Because guess what? Part of that model was a continuous evolution. Company's way bigger now than it was when I left. That has continued to evolve. It's been 8 years since I left. When I left, we were very much still doing this model over the years. Yeah, it's going to change. And Spotify not doing the Spotify model as I describe in this chapter doesn't mean the Spotify model doesn't work. What I would say is, no, it works great. Works great I saw it work exceptionally well for between 300 developers to 800 developers. It was a pretty big team. Would I say that it works from 800 to 1,500, 3,000, or how many they have today? Clearly not. Or it maybe had some challenges and they decided to go a different way, company culture change. They're much more of a media company now than a technology company. When I was there, Spotify was a technology company in the media space. Today, I very much think they think of themselves as a media company, which is appropriate. So that also is another reason why they may change how they do their development. But that doesn't mean it didn't work when I was there, because it absolutely did. One of the things that used to frustrate me was I would see these articles that said, we tried the Spotify model, it doesn't work, or Spotify doesn't work. Or I have seen a very famous article now from somebody who was a contractor, worked there for a few months, and then wrote this scathing article. The Spotify model totally doesn't work. No, I'm sorry. I was there multiple years. Works really well. Talked to most people who were there. It worked really well. And also, you can't really argue with the success of the company using that model. Because during the time I was there, we went from I think 15 million monthly active to 110, 120 million monthly active. And while I was there, Apple entered the market, Google entered the market, much bigger companies, much more to invest. Amazon entered the market, and Spotify wasn't crushed by these massive companies coming in. And arguably, the two biggest, certainly when I joined Spotify, the two biggest music companies in the world were Apple, because of Apple iTunes, and Google, because of YouTube. Those were the two biggest music companies in the world. YouTube still probably, but right after that is Spotify. And as far as music streaming, specifically music streaming companies, Spotify's number one still. And is that because of the Spotify model? Nope. It's partially, though, because of the Spotify model and Spotify's ability to iterate and deliver value to customers quickly and be able to drive and new things a lot faster than any of these other big companies, and then any of the other smaller companies who were mostly organized in a much more traditional way. Is the Spotify model, the engineering model, responsible for Spotify's success? No, it isn't, but it certainly didn't hurt it. So if you hear something or see something that says, Spotify model doesn't work, no, clearly did, because 300 plus million monthly active users doesn't argue. Actually, it might be higher than that. I have to check my numbers. I'll put them in the show notes. But anyway, prior to coming to Spotify, I'd been at Microsoft for 8 years. I'd been at Adobe for 9 years, both good companies in their way, both effective companies in their way, but I saw a lot of problems. And I'll say at the beginning of this chapter, I talk about a few challenges of traditional hierarchical command and control organizations. And certainly, I just told you 2 companies that were very much that way, 17 years doing that as both an individual contributor and a manager. So I know that model very well. Spotify sought to diminish those challenges or remove those challenges. And I'll say that I don't do straw man arguments. So in this book, if I say this happens in organizations, it's not because I just made it up so that I could rail against it. If I tell you something happens in organizations, it's because I lived it. The examples I give, I've seen or worked through, or because people I know, people I trust, have talked to me about having this problem in their own company. So whenever I say, oh, in organizations, this kind of stuff happens, I'm not making that up so I can give you a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. I'll say this because in a lot of books, management or leadership books, I read stuff and say, oh, this happens in organizations. I'm like, no, that doesn't. Like if it does, like I don't know what kind of companies you're in, but that's not a real problem that I've ever seen in the many companies I've worked at. Just making that point clear. So another thing I'll talk about, and I'll talk about this more maybe in the next episode, is I just told you this model worked exceptionally well, lived it, really was happy being a leader in this kind of company, learned a lot about technology leadership in my time at this company. Do I still do this stuff? I'm at DistroKid now. Does DistroKid have squads, tribes? Nope, it does not. Because, and this next chapter is all about that, because DistroKid is not Spotify. DistroKid's a different company, has a different history, different culture, was formed differently. It would be weird and it wouldn't fit. It wouldn't work. If I just showed up one day, said, oh, I'm here now. We're doing Spotify now. I'll say one thing that's interesting is I have multiple peers because it's music industry. So I have multiple peers I worked with at Spotify, people I know, who also are very comfortable in that model. So in the leadership, there is multiple Spotify people. There's multiple people that understand that structure. We are not doing it. Not because it didn't work at Spotify, but because it wouldn't work at DistroKid. Do we steal ideas from there? Always. Every company. In this book, you hear me talk about Avo. You hear me talk about Astromeo at one point. Other companies where I was a leader after Spotify, totally do that. On every company, there are lessons I learned at Spotify. I find ways to apply in every company I'm in. And there'll be similarities to some ideas, but implementations are very different because it's specific to the company I work in. So if this book gives you ideas about how to approach your role, about how to approach your organization, about how to do things in a different way, and I say this a lot in the book, and I'll say it in person as well, and whenever you hear me talk, it isn't, don't do this the way I did it, or the way the company I was at did it, and I tell you about. Take the good ideas from it, the ideas that resonate with you, and find the way to apply them in your own company. Do it in the way that your company does it. Do it in the way that you as a leader do it. I steal ideas. I am constantly paying attention to what my peers at other companies are doing. I am trying to learn and see how other people approach problems and taking the best ideas and trying to figure out how to incorporate them into my own practices, my own view of the world, my own approaches to everything from team organization, management, to technical structures and architectures and ways of working. All that kind of stuff I learn from other people. And if you go through this book and you learn a lot of things and you figure out the way to do them in a way that works for you, then the book has done its job. Then you've really gotten the value out of what I've been trying to provide. So when we talk about Spotify, and we talk a lot about Spotify in this book, when we talk about this stuff, look at what we did. And I'm not telling you if it didn't work, I tell you it didn't work. But look at the stuff we did that worked. Look at the stuff we did that didn't work. Decide, you know what? There's something there, maybe not exactly that way, but maybe slightly different. So when you're reading the book, when you're listening to the book, look for these ideas. Look for these ideas that resonate with you, that you can do your own spin on, that makes sense for you and your organization and your company. Steal them. And if you do them better, or it works great, or if it doesn't work, say, you know what? We tried this. Write your own blog post, write your own book. We tried this. It worked great. This is how we did it. And if it doesn't work out, say, well, we tried this. It didn't quite work for us. Here's why. Because, by the way, just saying the things I didn't like about the anti-Spotify model blog posts I would read would be like, it doesn't work. And there's no explanation. Like, either we tried, it doesn't work, period. Or no, like, what did you try? Why didn't it work? Share your lessons. Because otherwise you're just complaining, right? If it works for you, if it doesn't work for you, share the lessons, write a blog post, write your own book. But when you do, say, this is what we did. This is why we did it. This is how it worked. This is how it didn't. And share that, because that's what makes it possible to learn from it. That is what I've tried to do in the book. So I don't just tell you, this is what we did. It worked great. You should do it. I say, this is what we did. This is why we did it. This is the parts that worked well. This is the parts that worked differently. And a lot of times I'll also say, this is what I would do differently the next time. Because what I'm trying to show you is, this is where we were trying to get to. This is how we tried to get to it. This tactic may have worked. This tactic didn't work. As I said, like, I incorporate ideas from a lot of places. I'm constantly looking for new approaches, new ways of doing the job that we do, and trying to learn those lessons, like trying to steal the best ideas so I can incorporate them into the way I do my job. And the ones that really work for me, the pieces I read that I share, or the podcasts I share, are when people say, this is what we did. This is why we did it. This is what worked well. This is what didn't work well. This is what we do differently next time. Because that gives you strategy, tactics, and retrospective. That is what I tried to do in the book. That is what I try and share with you again. So it's not that I'm telling you, here's tactic, do tactic, and you'll have the same result I did, because you won't. You're a different company, different time, different circumstances. It's, here's what we were trying to do, and then this is the way we did it. And if you were thinking, I like that, I want to do that same thing, but maybe I need to do a different tactic because I'm in a different company. This section, this chapter is really about giving you some insight, not only into the Spotify model, but also into why we did it the way we did it, how it worked, what worked well, what didn't work well. And I'll tell you, those lessons have been instrumental to me. I have never done the Spotify model again because I don't work at Spotify anymore. But I absolutely use those lessons and those strategies and those approaches and those values. I just do use them in a way that is appropriate to the company culture of the company I'm in and to the way the company is structured. And do I evolve that structure over time? Absolutely, because I'm trying to improve it. Do I evolve it towards Spotify? Probably not. But I evolve it to try and be the better version of itself. That's what I'm always kind of coming back to is, what is this company? And how do we make it the best version of itself and the way that it was intended to be? Here is chapter 26 of It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022, The Spotify Model, How to Create, Dissolve, and Remix Teams to be More Dynamic and More Innovative. The Spotify Model, How to Create, Dissolve, and Remix Teams to be More Dynamic and More Innovative. Originally published on January 6th, 2015. One of the most challenging parts of managing a traditional hierarchical organization is being responsive to new opportunities, especially those that require leveraging skill sets outside your own team. At Spotify, our organizational model allows us to create, dissolve, and remix teams with minimal disruption to individuals or managers. This gives us tremendous abilities to address both temporary and long-term opportunities. How it used to be. As a manager at Microsoft and Adobe, I was always challenged when there was a problem or opportunity that required repurposing a team or adding on additional scope to an existing team. This kind of thing comes up all the time, a business opportunity or integration with another product. Often, this would require small efforts from multiple specialized teams. It would cause disruption as those teams had to change their current plans and coordinate around a new challenge while still making progress towards their existing goals. Given that people and resources were managed within the team and managers were still responsible for delivery of their existing commitments, often it would be hard to motivate them towards supporting this new effort. Creating a new tiger team is often the solution in these situations, but that isn't always an adequate solution for long-term or permanent projects, since it essentially punishes the managers of the existing teams and requires finding a new temporary manager for the new team. Another problem in existing organizations is figuring out what to do with a team whose project has been canceled. If the team is a high-performing team, you may try to turn the team onto a new problem, which may or may not be a good fit for their skills and experience. You may instead dissolve the team, assigning the members to new teams based on the needs of those teams rather than the preferences of the individuals. You may leave it up to the individuals to find new roles in the company or face layoffs if they are unsuccessful. These solutions end up punishing both the individuals on the teams and their managers, often for reasons beyond their control. In an organization seeking to innovate, which requires some amount of failure, it sends a counter message to one of experimenting and taking chances. How we remix teams at Spotify. At Spotify, we wanted to create an organization that allowed us to be dynamic around our staffing and adaptable in our teams. We embrace failure as being important to learning and innovation, so we didn't want dissolving a team to be a punishment. We put this new organizational model into effect over 2 years ago and have been working with it since. In that time, the technical organization has grown from 250 to over 600 people. We went from having 3 engineering offices to 5, and from having 30 teams to over 70. We focused on building full-stack autonomous teams built around a single, clear mission. The expectation is that it will dissolve once the team's mission has been fulfilled. To this end, new teams are constantly being created and old teams dissolving, with their members building new teams or moving on to existing teams if they need additional staffing. Rather than create a former manager role for these teams, we decided instead to make the teams collectively responsible for fulfilling their mission. With this model, changing teams does not mean changing your manager, and dissolving a team doesn't leave a manager looking for a new role. We do have a strong belief in the role of the manager as a mentor to their reports, so we have a strong managerial culture. It is just manifested in a matrix rather than a hierarchical model. Why chapter leads work better than traditional managers. Our technical managers are called chapter leads. They're usually responsible for managing a narrow range of developer disciplines within their larger organizations. For example, mobile developers or backend developers. A chapter lead usually has direct reports and multiple teams in the organization. For an individual, it is common to change teams, but it is less common to change managers. As each team is responsible for their full stack and all platforms, a team may include members from several chapters. An example is the search team in my organization. Its members come from 5 different chapters: the backend chapter, the mobile chapter, the keyboard and mouse, desktop and web chapter, the agile coach chapter, and the test chapter. Additionally, there is the product owner and a UX designer, both of whom are part of the product organization, which is organized more traditionally. The chapter leads are not responsible for deliverables directly. Instead, the chapter leads are responsible for staffing the teams appropriately, for working with the individuals in the team to help them grow, and for working with the product owner and the agile coach to make sure that the team is performing well together. Since the chapter lead has visibility into multiple teams, they can often identify short or long-term skill set needs and are empowered to resolve them. Sometimes this means switching two developers in two teams temporarily for a skill set need. Sometimes this means moving a developer to a different team to address a short-term staffing need. This also means that if there is a new mission to be addressed, the chapter leads can work together to staff a new team to address that mission out of the existing teams in the organization. A benefit of this model for an individual is that there are many opportunities for them to work on new projects or develop new skill sets since there are new projects spinning up on a regular clip. When and how we remix and dissolve teams. This remixing is not constant throughout the technology team. We do have several very long-lived teams that are focused on features in the product, but even those teams will shift people between each other based on short or long-term needs. In some parts of the organization, specifically the infrastructure teams, they tend to be focused on short-term projects and are creating new teams more often. Those teams dissolve when they have completed their project. We will also dissolve teams if we believe their mission is no longer necessary. Usually, this is the result of the team invalidating their mission themselves. We celebrate these conclusions just as much as the successful completion of the project, since we value these lessons from a failed project. Celebrating your failures as valuable lessons encourages risk-taking, experimentation, and innovation. By striving towards a model that gives the individual consistency, their manager, and their chapter, while still offering the organization fluidity and adaptability, we found a happy balance that lets us extend our Agile-first values beyond the work that a team performs to the organization as a whole. This has allowed us to focus on innovation and leverage opportunities that slower-moving organizations would have difficulty addressing. Several companies have attempted to adapt our model, but there is something critical to understand. Our organizational model is fluid and continues to change and evolve to support its needs. The specifics of our implementation are less important than the underlying values and ideals that created it. If you want the benefits of a dynamic organization, you will need to build something suited to your organization's values. I would argue that a central requirement is endowing teams with autonomy and decision-making authority. If you cannot support this, then you should look instead to adapt your existing model to remove impediments and bottlenecks instead. I hope you found this chapter and this episode informative. I hope you've learned something from it. Please, if you have a question, if you have a comment, reach out to me at contact@itdependsbook.net. It Depends Book, one word, nothing in between the words, and .net. That website, itdependsbook.net, also where you can find out information about the book, how to buy the book, all that good stuff, links to obviously this podcast, but also to the newsletter. You can also find a link to the survey on that page. Please, please, please fill out the survey. It will also be in the show notes. We've got 10 chapters left. Well, we're on chapter 26. There are 36 chapters in the book, so 9 more chapters after this. And so really want to get your input on where to go from here and if I should go on from here. So really would appreciate you doing that. Thanks a lot. I will see you in 2 weeks here on the podcast. I will see you next week in the newsletter. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.